The Washington Park Arboretum is a tree place, a place for trees both common and exotic. It is a tree museum whose exhibits change with the seasons. It is a tranquil retreat in the midst of urban discord. And it is a unique link in a chain of international arboreta which share their research and their seeds. The Washington Park Arboretum is one of the world's great woody plant collections. Its site in the Pacific Northwest is gifted with a moderate climate that rarely experiences prolonged temperature extremes. As a result, a greater variety of plants can thrive here than in most other locations in North America. The idea to establish an arboretum in Seattle originated in the 1890s when plans were being developed for the new University of Washington site on Union Bay. At that time, legendary professor and state legislator Edmund Meany started what would become the Arboretum's involvement in the International Seed Exchange. He propagated the first seedlings in his own garden in the hope that he could eventually transfer them to the campus Arboretum. But it would take another 40 years and the continued efforts of Dean of Forestry Hugo Winkenwerter and committed citizens like Donald Graham and Dorothy Bullitt to start the work. They developed an arrangement between the city and the university. The city owns the land and manages the Japanese garden, plus structural aspects such as roads, walks, lights, and water systems. The university owns the plantings and is responsible for management of the plant collections and displays. It was in 1935, in the depths of the Great Depression, that a group of citizens started the Arboretum Foundation, a public support group which has since then played an important role in the development of the Arboretum. One factor during the Depression that worked in the Arboretum's favor was the need to relieve the growing numbers of unemployed through public works programs. The Arboretum put unemployed people to work. The bulk of that work was done by the Works Progress Administration, or WPA, between 1935 and 1941, at a cost of $1.5 million. The concept of public parks in urban settings came to the United States primarily through the work of Frederick Law Olmsted, designer of New York's Central Park. His influence is found in several places in Seattle, including the University of Washington campus and Volunteer Park. Thanks to a $3,000 gift from the Seattle Garden Club, James Dawson of the Olmsted Brothers landscape firm was hired to draw up a plan for the Arboretum. He submitted preliminary plans for the Arboretum in 1936. The Seattle Arboretum was to be laid out in a taxonomic arrangement, where plants are grouped by their scientific classification: oaks, witch hazels, hollies, or camellias, all in their own sections within the Arboretum. This plan shaped the plantings done during the first decade of the Arboretum under the direction of John Hanley. But when Brian Mulligan took over as director of the Arboretum in 1946, he saw immediately that while much of the design had strong aesthetic features, the Dawson plan required that many of the plants be located where they would not grow well. The pines needed a sunnier place with better drainage, the camellias partial shade. Director Emeritus of the Washington Park Arboretum, Brian Mulligan.
Well, the Olmsted plan was laid out on paper. They started with one family of plants at one end of the Arboretum, and they worked their way around the whole area, locating the different families in different situations. But they didn't pay enough attention, in my opinion, to the local conditions, either too much shade for the sun-loving plants or too wet for plants which like dry situations.
Brian Mulligan's contribution to the successful early development of the Arboretum cannot be underestimated. He came to the Arboretum from the Royal Horticultural Society's gardens in Wisley, England, and his reputation as a careful scholar gave Seattle's fledgling Arboretum a high degree of credibility in the international botanical community. As a result, the Washington Park Arboretum obtained rare seeds and plants from sources around the world that would not have been otherwise available to it. Because of his wise planting decisions and international reputation, and because he invested so much of his life into it during the 26 years of his directorship, the Arboretum we see today bears his personal imprint more than any other individual. About a decade after Brian Mulligan's retirement in 1972, the University of Washington Provost appointed Dr. Harold B. Tukey, Jr. as the director, with the mandate to expand the academic and public service dimensions of the Arboretum's programs. This charge resulted in the creation of the Center for Urban Horticulture, located on the University of Washington campus about 2 miles from the Arboretum. The Center for Urban Horticulture includes classrooms, laboratories, the Douglas Research Conservatory, the Elizabeth Miller Library, and the Otis Hyde Hortatorium. During the 1980s, key collections such as the Joseph A. Witt Winter Garden and the Brian O. Mulligan Sorbus collections were developed or renovated, and computerized methods were introduced. Today's Washington Park Arboretum has over 5,200 different species, growing in 7 different types of soil on 200 acres of land stretching south from Lake Washington's Union Bay. Let's take a tour of some of the collections to explore its riches. Most people begin their walk through the Arboretum at the Donald Graham Visitor Center, which was dedicated in 1986 with funds provided by the Arboretum Foundation. From there, access is easy to Azalea Way, which extends 3/4 of a mile south toward the Japanese Garden. Azalea Way was designed by James Dawson to be the spine of the Arboretum. He saw it as a showcase for azaleas and cherries that would thrive in the moist climate. Work started on it in 1939. There are now 83 species and varieties of azaleas represented, both Asiatic and Native American, and 18 varieties of cherries. Most notable are the Yoshino cherries, an Olmsted trademark. They are the same famous cherries as those found around the tidal basin in Washington, D.C. Walking south along Azalea Way, you will find one of the first collections just to the east in the Woodland Garden. Here, and in other locations, you will find over 135 species within the Asiatic maple collection. Visit in autumn, when the maple's foliage is particularly colorful. Further along, and flanking Azalea Way to the east, run Loteri Valley and Rhododendron Glen, which are homes to the park's rhododendron collections. The rhododendrons are in full bloom in April and May. But almost any month, you can find a few plants in flower. Go in spring when the cherries and azaleas are in full bloom. Or go in winter to get an unobscured view of the conifers and deciduous plants. Continue on to the Japanese garden named Arbor of the Whispering Pines. It was built through the efforts of Seattle's Japanese community and the support of the Arboretum Foundation. It is one of the best such gardens found outside of Japan and was designed by the eminent Juki Aida. To witness the solemn and graceful tea ceremony performed in the tea house is an extraordinary experience. The autumn moon viewing ceremony observes the Zen traditions established over thousands of years. From the southern end of the Arboretum, by the stone cottage, it is a short walk to the holly and witch hazel collections. Because they grow so well in this climate, the witch hazels will receive additions to form a cultivar reference collection for scholars and horticulturalists from around the world. The best time to see both of these collections is in winter. The variety of hollies is particularly impressive, and the fragrant winter bloom of the witch hazel is always a welcome sight. Under a canopy of native Douglas fir and western red cedar, the camellia collection has over 600 varieties of mostly Camellia japonica cultivars. Blooms begin in October and continue through May. Many interesting plants can be enjoyed along the upper drive. Chilean firebrush and interesting companion plants from the southern hemisphere. Giant sequoias and other mature conifer trees. And the Brian O. Mulligan Sorbus collection of mountain ash trees. There is a great variety among sorbus foliage, from large individual leaves to delicate fern-like arrangements. The Washington Park Arboretum has one of the world's largest, most varied collections. It is the result of the special efforts of Director Emeritus Brian Mulligan, and the Sorbus Grove has been named in his honor. The magnolia trees are near the head of Lodorei Valley. The magnolia is a primitive ancient lineage of trees, and it is unusual for being pollinated by flower beetles. This pollination technique goes back millions of years to when the magnolia first evolved, because more common pollinators like bees and butterflies didn't yet exist. The hemlocks, firs, cedars, and ground covers provide a native framework that weaves throughout the Arboretum. The Joseph A. Witt Winter Garden was named to honor the curator of plants at the Arboretum. The Winter Garden features plants that are particularly beautiful in that season. At the north end of the Arboretum is Foster Island. It has lagoons and wetlands and a rich bird life. A waterfront trail traverses the area. From Foster Island, it's a short distance back to the Donald Graham Visitor Center. It is a facility that serves both the public and the foundation. Many resources are available to visitors, such as information, lectures, and tours. And as a focal point for the foundation, activities including study groups and fundraising events are common. The mission of the Arboretum Foundation is to ensure stewardship for the Washington Park Arboretum, a Pacific Northwest treasure, and to provide horticultural leadership for the region. This stewardship requires effective leadership, stable funding, and broad public support. The University of Washington oversees volunteer-guided tours, as well as volunteers that staff the school saplings program. This program brings Seattle school children into the Arboretum.
See what you have, and if you have 10 different leaves.
I don't think so. I think these are the same.
Okay.
Yeah.
So now you think that you have not 10, but maybe 8 different leaves. Now look very carefully.
That one looks different from that one, sort of. Check it out. The veins aren't as big. Check out the veins aren't as big. I know.
What lies ahead for the Washington Park Arboretum? First, most planners believe that the Arboretum needs to become easier to use as a teaching resource. The taxonomic organization of the original plan does not reflect the way most courses in horticulture are taught today, and new ways to organize the collection to support these new teaching methods and the needs of home gardeners are likely. Along these lines, new collections of plants from around the world are likely to appear. They will be selected to demonstrate the true climate patterns of the Northwest, a climate of wet winters and dry summers, a climatic pattern found in the Mediterranean, as well as our counterparts in the Southern Hemisphere, places like Chile and New Zealand. Secondly, work needs to be done to make the collections more easily understood by the general public. Better trail systems will be devised, more interpretive signs will be installed, and new educational exhibits and resources developed. The people who support the Washington Park Arboretum and its programs will ensure that it remains faithful to its mission. It is important to remember that it is not just a lovely park. It is a museum, a teaching tool, and a source of information for scholars and horticulturalists around the world. Happily, it is also one of the most beautiful places in Seattle to spend a lazy afternoon, reading under a tree, walking with your family, or just forgetting your troubles.